A 15-year-old boy, Tim Cynthia, is practicing swordsmanship with the determination to become an adventurer. A woman stood nearby, silently observing. After practice, Tim went inside, wondering if he could get 4 hours of sleep before starting his next task. As soon as I walked in, 3 boys appeared before him. One of them complained about Tim practicing swordsmanship every day, bothering them. The second told Tim not to dream of becoming strong because he would never improve. The first guy mocked Tim, saying that even though he'd been in the group for 3 years, he was still just a rookie. He said he'd be embarrassed if it were him. Then he scoffed, asking Tim if he really believed he could become an explorer, advising him to give up because you will always be just a servant. In a cruel act, he broke Tim's sword. He said that perhaps the boy would give up now. Tim, feeling disappointed, sat down with the broken sword in his hand, anxious and unsure of what to do next. The girl, who had been watching him from a distance, remained silent and offered no help. The next morning, Swordmaster Ganesh arrived and called for Tim. Everyone around was surprised, not understanding what Ganesh wanted from Tim. Approaching closer, Ganesh whispered in Tim's ear that the president was calling him. Tim felt his heart sink, a wave of fear washing over him as he heard the president's name, wondering what this would mean for him. As they left, a young female doctor named Fiona walked by, catching Tim's attention. Ganesh led Tim to a door and told him to go inside. The chairman allowed Tim in and told Ganesh to return to his work, which Ganesh agreed to. When Tim walked into Gilnari's, the chairperson was seated in her chair. She was about to explain why she had called him, but before she could say anything, Tim knelt down and apologized, begging her not to expel him from the club. The club president was surprised by Tim's unexpected apology. In a moment of emotion, Tim confessed that he wanted to become an explorer, but he felt hopeless because he was poor at both swordsmanship and magic, and begged her not to send him away. President Gilnari's comforted Tim, telling him to calm down and assuring him that she had only called him in to check on his progress. She asked if anything worried him, like a difficult job or being bullied by others. Tim replied that he had no complaints, and that becoming a member of the organization was like a dream come true. Gilnari's encouraged him to share anything that was bothering him and promised to help. Tim hesitated but eventually spoke up, saying it wasn't dissatisfaction. She asked him again if he was sure. Recognizing her genuine concern, Tim confessed that there was one thing he wished for. Gilnari's excitedly asked what it was. Tim explained that he wanted to try participating in a mission. She warned that it would be a dangerous mission, but Tim insisted that he was ready. He had been in the guild for 3 years without ever participating in a mission, and felt that simply doing menial tasks wasn't enough for someone who wanted to become an explorer. Gilnari's understood Tim's enthusiasm, but was still worried about the potential danger he might be in. Gilnari's offered to accompany Tim on the mission, ensuring his safety. "Let's not waste time," she said. Just then, Tim noticed that her ring had started to glow. She used it to contact the reception desk, who immediately asked what was wrong. Gilnari's explained the situation to her. Tim realized that the ring was a treasure, a rare item known for its ability to grant its user mystical powers. He had heard of such treasures before and knew they came in many different varieties. Gilnari's asked the receptionist if there were any simple requests. The receptionist replied that for the guildmaster, hunting an A-rank imperial dragon was feasible, or even M-rank quests would be easy. However, Gilnari's refused and inquired about the request to gather herbs. The receptionist regretfully replied that such simple requests were not available within the Gilnari's group. Gilnari's then decided to create the request himself, and said that Tim would take on the role. Tim felt a little overwhelmed, thinking that things were happening too quickly. The receptionist agreed with the president's decision. Then Gilnari's turned to Tim and asked when he had his next day off. Tim replied that it would be around noon tomorrow. Gilnari's confirmed this and immediately told Raphael to cancel their lunch plans for tomorrow. Tim was stunned, unable to believe his ears. Was she talking to Raphael during the holy night? Raphael, hearing Gilnari's decision, asked if she would be skipping lunch with the managers tomorrow. Gilnariz explained that she had decided to go on assignment with Tim instead. Raphael was surprised, asking who Tim was, but quickly understood that the situation was urgent and unavoidable. Tim was still stunned by everything that had happened. Noticing his surprise, Gilnariz said she would prepare lunch tomorrow. She asked if there was anything he would like to eat. She encouraged Tim to be honest, because she had practiced cooking and would make whatever he asked. Tim hesitated for a moment before replying that he liked fried eggs. Just then, Blue Spear Natalia burst in, clearly angry. She slammed the door open, and in an irritated voice, they asked if Gilnariz would actually skip their lunch tomorrow. Gilnariz calmly reminded her that Natalia wasn't allowed in. Soon after, the other explorers arrived. Windcutter Nia approached Gilnariz and asked if it was all right for them to stay. She had heard Raphael's account of the situation and was clearly very upset. She expressed her anger, saying it was humiliating that the head of the guild had prioritized a task for Tim over them. For adventurers like them, at mithril level, that was understandable, but hearing about someone like Tim, who only did menial tasks, was unacceptable. Nia pointed at Tim and added that it was inappropriate for someone like him to be speaking to Guildmaster Gilnariz. Gilnariz ordered everyone to leave without hesitation. Nia, surprised by Gilnariz's firmness, asked if she was really serious. Gilnariz gave them a cold stare, warning them not to make her repeat herself. She said that, although this time she would overlook their insults towards Tim, but they had to leave immediately. The explorers, deservedly reprimanded, bowed in apology and departed. Tim, still confused, ran his hand through his hair. He couldn't help but think the managers were clearly annoyed. But what puzzled him was why Gilnariz was taking such a strong stance. Then, to his astonishment, she suddenly called them back and bowed before them. Tim froze at this gesture. Gilnariz looked up and apologized to him, explaining that the group should honor an ideal, not her. Tim told her to lift her head, explaining that he was just an errand boy. He knelt before her and added that if she continued to bow her head, he would humble himself even further. With a gentle smile, she asked why he had to bow his head like that. Tim replied that the odd jobs he did were what kept the society running. And she seemed to be the only one who understood that. Gilnariz assured him that she would be meeting other people tomorrow, probably in the dining room. As Natalia's group left, Tim muttered to himself that if it weren't for that sacred artifact, he wouldn't have had to bow to her. He seemed a little cheeky in his thinking. Nia overheard this and wondered why the president supported Tim so much. She said she had an idea, but didn't elaborate further. The next day, as Tim waited in the lobby, he thought Gilnariz would arrive soon. Just then, a man called out to him and said that the chairman wanted a cup of tea. Tim took the teacup and went to deliver it, thinking as he went that he should do something to thank her. However, later that day, just as he was about to leave, a boy kicked the teacup out of Tim's hand. It shattered. The boy, speaking loudly and deliberately so everyone around could hear, accused Tim of taking the president's teacup without permission and breaking it. Tim was stunned by the accusation and quickly defended himself, saying he didn't mean to do it. Nia appeared and remarked that this was a serious matter, while others chimed in agreement, saying that Tim had damaged the chairman's property. Just then, Gilnariz appeared, asking what was causing the commotion. Nia pointed out that the guildmaster had arrived, and Tim noticed that her outfit today looked more formal than usual. Unfortunately, this wasn't a mission day, and he broke her cup. Gilnariz replied that it was just an ordinary cup, and that everything would be fine if Tim wasn't hurt. However, Tim was still trembling with anxiety. Nia spoke up, asserting that this was a major issue and reminding everyone of the society's rule number 12. The rules state that anyone who takes or damages the guildmaster's property will be expelled. This means Tim must leave the guild. Gilnariz explained that the cup was less important than the treasures and forbidden books she was protecting. But Nia countered, pointing out that even the teacups were the head of the council's property, and therefore the rules still applied. Gilnariz agreed, reminding everyone that the managers, who rarely made appearances, had gathered together. and the fact that the cup shattered appears to have been caused by great force, possibly related to wind magic. She asked Naya if she had considered that possibility. Naya, confused, asked what she meant. Then they simply suggested removing Tim to solve the problem. Tim, feeling weighed down, thought to himself that he was about to be deported without ever having had the chance to become a real adventurer. Gilnarize, noticing his despair, sarcastically remarked that his pride was ridiculous. But then, with a touch of regret, she apologized. She said that, as the president, she was forced to expel him. Tim was stunned, collapsing to the floor in shock. A boy standing nearby thanked Gilnarize for her decision, noting that he had been worried about the headmistress having to handle small tasks like cooking all by herself. Tim, feeling utterly defeated, thought it was all over. He was just doing menial tasks and had no excuse left. Unexpectedly, Gilnarize announced that she would be leaving the society to follow Tim. Everyone was stunned by the statement, wondering what nonsense she was spouting. A chairman cannot simply leave the association without resolving all the issues. Calmly, she declared that she would leave behind all her treasures and possessions. Naya, confused, asked what she said. Gilnarize explained that she was referring to her sacred treasure and her other treasures, and that she was now entrusting them to Naya. Naya, clearly impressed, remarked that they were wonderful. Gilnarize then revealed that her sacred treasure was called Nirvana. She continued to remove her treasures and belongings. Naya pointed out that the ring on her finger was still there. Gilnarize replied that it wasn't a treasure, just a ring with a red stone. Nia then suggested that if it wasn't a treasure, she should leave it behind. Then Naya thanked her for her youthful innocence and stopped calling her president and ordered her to leave the society immediately. As Tim and Gilnarize walked outside, Tim asked why she had done that. Gilnarize reassured him, saying not to worry. The society had ended a long time ago. That's why she left. She said that now they needed to find a place to live and start a new journey. Tim couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't need to do that just for him. While she was resting, he offered to go find something to eat and suggested she rest at a nearby inn. While she was resting, Tim thought that she shouldn't be around someone like him. Tim made a promise to himself that he would reclaim the guild for Gilnarize. He sought out Nia, who had now become the new guild master. Tim knelt before him, begging him to return the guild to Gilnarize. Nia merely gave a wry smile and replied that it was futile, no matter how many times Tim pleaded. With Nirvana in his possession, he no longer needed Gilnarize. However, Nia seemed pleased that this moment had finally arrived. He took out a box and said that, even though he had left the judge behind, he was still having trouble getting rid of it. Tim realized it was the lunchbox Gilnarize had made for him. Nia casually tossed the lunchbox aside, saying he could throw it away now. When Tim inspected the food inside, Nia commented that it looked no different from animal feed. Tim tasted it and thought about how Gilnarize had made this dish for him. The flavor was sweet and delicate, imbued with her love and care. Then Naya took Gilnarize's ring and threw it away, saying that he might throw that away too. He scoffed, saying it was baffling that Gilnarize would send such a ridiculous item. As Naya was about to crush the ring under her feet, Tim yelled, telling him to stop. Naya, noticing Tim's anger, smirked and said, "You want to beat him up, right?" Then, before Tim could react, Nia punched him in the face, saying that's how he should fight if he wanted to get anything back. Naya asked him if he intended to follow his orders and told him to feel free to resist if he wanted to. He even sarcastically remarked that if Tim thought he could only be a henchman, then he'd better accept it. After saying that, Nia hit Tim hard, causing him to fall to the ground, but he still glared at him. Nia, angered by Tim's attitude, calls him insolent and asks if it's necessary to wipe that arrogance out of him. As Nia prepared to poke her finger in Tim's eye, Swordmaster Ganesh intervened, stopping them and saying that Tim had suffered enough. Ganesh carried Tim away, telling Naya that he would handle the matter. Naya, displeased, ordered that Tim be deported from the country. Ganesh ignored them and brought Tim, now severely wounded, to Gilnarize. Upon seeing Tim's condition, Gilnarize turned pale with worry. Ganesh helped Tim lie down on the bed and explained that he had been fighting with Nia. Gilnerise, confused and not understanding why Tim did that, she noticed her ring on his hand. The sight filled her with emotion, realizing that Tim had brought it back. Then, Ganesh quietly left, leaving them alone. Sometime later, Tim woke up. Tim was astonished to find that all his wounds had completely healed. He noticed Gilnerise sitting beside him, dozing off near his bed. Tim understood that it was her healing magic that had helped him recover. He also saw the ring in her palm and realized she no longer wore it. Tim gently took the ring and put it back on Gilnerise's finger, whispering that he would become a great explorer, and I hope you will follow his journey. The scene then shifts to the gathering. Naya was being congratulated by someone for being appointed the new president. Naya, appearing indifferent, brushed off the compliment and asked what the person wanted. He said they needed to find someone to replace Tim. Nia replied that they could manage without Tim. But the boy objected, saying that Tim was the only one who handled all the chores, and without him, the whole group would fall into chaos. Naya was stunned to learn that Tim had single-handedly taken on the responsibility of caring for 1,000 members of the organization. The scene shifts back to Gilnerise, where she tells Tim that she has a favor to ask of him. Tim was delighted to hear this and eagerly asked what it was. Gilnerise explained that the inn charged extra for using the bathroom, but they were almost out of money. She asked if Tim could handle this for her. Tim hesitated slightly, replying that it might be difficult, but Gilnerise insisted. Finally, Tim used his laundry skills to clean Gilnerise, making her look like she had just taken a bath. The results surprised and delighted Gilnerise. She felt refreshed and even noticed an improvement in her health. Tim explained that he had eliminated toxins, bacteria, waste products, and even adverse conditions like poisoning or curses, treating them all as mere dirt. Gilnerise, astonished, asked if it was really that simple, that curses and weakened states were just dirt. She smiled gratefully, thanked Tim, and said that thanks to him, the adventurers would never get sick, and could even use cursed weapons with ease. Tim humbly replied that he couldn't heal wounds, so what he did couldn't be as impressive as Gilnerise's magic. Then he mentioned that he would go prepare breakfast. Gilnerise asked about the ingredients, but Tim reassured her, saying not to worry, he could use the society's archives so everything would be fine. Gilnerise was confused by this. Tim immediately used his organization skill and produced a large quantity of food, along with plates and bottles of wine, to serve. This astonished Gilnerise. She asked if he had the ability to control space. Tim was also surprised by the question. He replied that it was just basic cleaning. He was simply rearranging things. Then Tim asked her what she wanted to eat. Gilnerise suggested hamburgers. Tim agreed and assured them that they would be delicious, juicy hamburgers. He began preparing the dish using his cooking skills. While waiting for food, he used his sewing skills to create a towel and a pillow. Place them on the table so she can sit comfortably. Everything only took 3 seconds, and Tim thanked her for waiting. When the hamburgers were ready, he brought them out to serve. Tim carried the hamburgers to Gilnerise. She stared at the food, wondering how the hamburger could have looked so delicious in such a short amount of time. Tim calmly mentioned that he had regularly prepared thousands of meals, and that's why he could cook so quickly. Gilnerise was astonished to hear that he had prepared thousands of meals. Tim then asked her what she wanted to drink. Gilnerise ordered orange juice. He agreed and used his cooking skills. Take the oranges, squeeze the juice, and mix, and served in a glass. Gilnerise was completely overwhelmed by his skill. Tim noticed her reaction and asked if something was wrong. He also pointed out that the orange juice had been chilled. He explained that it was a freezing cooking method combined with his cooking skills. Gilnerise blushed at his explanation. Then Tim sat down opposite her to eat with her. He told himself that even if it was just a chance encounter, he was actually sharing a meal with Gilnerise. Gilnerise suggested they eat before the food got cold. Tim agreed, and they both enjoyed their meal. Tim then asked her if they were planning to go on an adventure. And have you recovered the guild's treasure stone along with her personal belongings yet? Gilnerise replied that it was all right because she had never lost anything. Everything had been given away voluntarily. As she sat on the bed, she gestured for Tim to sit down beside her. Tim hesitated for a moment, but then sat down next to her. Gilnerise explained that the organization was named after her, which is quite rare. She emphasized that it's not common for organizations to name themselves after their leaders. Tim agreed, noting that this almost never happens in other organizations. Gilnerise then began to tell a story from her past. She recounted that she had displayed magical talents from a very young age, attracting adventurers from all over the world. Thanks to her powers, the number of adventurers increased, and before she knew it, they had formed a guild. Eventually, she was chosen as its leader, which is why the guild is named after her. She recounted that she always wanted to see happy faces around her, so she took on many tasks and collected many rare items. However, one day, she realized something that worried her. She overheard some adventurers calling her a tool for obtaining rare items. Gilnerise told Tim that many people joined her group simply because they were interested in her power and abilities. The dinner party she canceled to join Tim on his adventure was merely a ploy to lure them into using her powers for their own purposes. Gilnerise is currently focused solely on fighting power, showing no compassion or concern for the other members. She also notices how badly they treat Tim. Tim, surprised, asks if she notices how they treat him. She replied that she had noticed him and realized the bullying. If he had spoken up, she could have helped, but when she called him, he started begging. Tim wanted to understand why she called him. In such a cruel place, she was the only one who truly saw who he was. She called him just to thank him. Tim also thanked her for sharing her story. He said that he wasn't seeking revenge, but she wouldn't forgive anyone who insulted her. Gilnerise laughed and said that just seeing him angry was enough for her. She suggested they work together gradually to become great adventurers and show the guild members what they were truly capable of. Tim agreed excitedly and looked at her with expectant eyes. She remarked that he was truly different. Tim replied that he was very happy that she was pleased. He then said he would make her a more comfortable outfit suitable for an adventurer. She was currently wearing a beautiful outfit, but he thought it wasn't appropriate for an adventure. Tim thought for a moment about the outfit, and in just 30 seconds, she felt his skills far exceeded her expectations. She then used her identification skills to learn more about the outfit and discovered that it was a powerful item. Tim responded that she didn't need to overestimate it. Gilnerise remarked that Tim had created such powerful items for adventurers. Tim shrugged and explained that he didn't spend 30 minutes on each of the thousands of outfits he'd sent her, but only made them in their basic form. She asked what if the suits were made temporarily, and Tim replied that they would fall apart after a day, but he would make custom outfits for each mission and send them out every morning, so it was fine if they were in a temporary state. She took note of this, and from that day on, the guild would go on adventures without his costume. She laughed and said that the guild wouldn't last even a week. They thought they were accomplishing the missions using their own strength, but in reality, it was all thanks to his powerful suit customized for each mission. Upon hearing this, Tim felt extremely emotional. Gilnerise asked him if something was wrong. Tim felt overwhelmed with happiness. He hadn't realized how wonderful it could be to be recognized. He then said that he would work even harder at the guild from now on. Nia is reviewing the tasks. He said they could easily replace the odd jobs. He felt that Tim and Gilnerise would have difficulty with food. According to reports, their guild had the fewest injuries and the highest mission completion rate, so they didn't need young girls or boys. He wondered why an elite guild would hire useless people with no combat skills, and who was in charge of recruitment. After checking, he discovered that the person in charge was Ganache. The scene shifts to Tim and Gilnerise, the innkeeper who demands 1,500 sol per night. Tim agreed to pay. Gilnerise apologized to Tim, explaining that she'd rushed out with only the clothes on her back. Tim replied that it was okay, as they still had money. The innkeeper then asked if the two were eloping together. Gilnerise blushed at the question. Tim quickly clarified that it wasn't like that. However, the man went on to say how sweet it was to see young lovers. Then he asked if Gilnaries was an actress, and if the boy was a servant in the mansion, and whether their love was forbidden by class, leading them to elope. Tim repeated that this was not the case. But the man wouldn't listen. After giving them some money, he told them to hide somewhere the mansion wouldn't find them, and instructed them to give the letter to the head merchant at the east gate. If it was a letter of introduction from Chris, the man said the guards would escort them to the neighboring Linhart kingdom. Tim tried to explain that wasn't the case, but the man just told him not to come back home. Gilnaries' face flushed red when she called Tim. Tim asked her what was wrong, and she replied that it was the death stare. With the letter of recommendation and the money in hand, they both left. Tim told Gilnaries that with this letter of recommendation, they could go to the Linhart kingdom. She said that the guild might recognize Tim's potential and would pursue them, so leaving the empire might be a smart decision. Tim agreed, saying it was unlikely, but that someone might recognize Gilnaries' face. She nodded, acknowledging that it was possible. Then she asked if they really intended to elope together. Tim apologized and admitted that he hadn't heard Gilnaries' question clearly, then asked if she could repeat it. She gave a strange smile and said there was nothing to worry about. More importantly, he could only imagine the shock on the other side. Tim assured her that it was okay. They could go by themselves. Gilnaries went on to say that while there might be joy, she suspected there would be sadness. Tim said he would be happy if that were true. Meanwhile, Chris was wondering if Tim and Gilnaries had arrived at the East Gate yet. At that moment, a woman called out to him and asked if he could come and see the room where the couple had stayed the previous night. Chris went to check and found the room very clean, wondering what had happened. The woman asked if he could believe it, remarking that the room seemed to have transformed into a royal suite overnight. She wondered if those two were house spirits or something similar. Tim told Gilnaries that he had now seen the East Gate, and the ultimate adventure is about to begin. She suggests they start with a gathering quest. Tim reiterated that his fighting skills were still weak. She reassured him that it was all right, because the recruitment exam included a combat skills test, and since Tim passed it, it proves he also possesses a certain level of combat ability. Tim replied that if that were the case, the winner of the recruitment process was Ganache. He had to battle a terrible hangover and spent the entire morning glued to the toilet, so he was unable to take the test. Ultimately, it all came down to flipping a coin, and the result was heads. When Tim asked Ganache about this, Ganache said that his vision was distorted, and he couldn't clearly see which side of the coin it was. Tim pointed out that it was the backside, but Ganache, with a smug smile, said that his true genius allowed him to see the front, and that was the real victory. Tim didn't fully understand what Ganache said, but he knew he had passed the exam. Gilnaries laughed and said that Ganache's words were nonsense, but at least it helped her meet Tim. She thanked Ganache for his hard work, even if it was a little delusional. However, they still needed to speak to Ganache. She ran to greet the officer in charge, only to avoid the mission she had bet on. She guessed that the other adventurers had also been chosen randomly. And that means the truth behind the so-called elite guild is that they delegate menial tasks to others, while keeping their main responsibilities to themselves. However, Nia thinks their guild is absolutely brilliant and can't wait to hear reports on the day's completed missions. Tim told Gilnaries that it was ridiculous, to which she replied that she was just like Ganache. No matter what the world or Tim thinks, even if they believe she's just a facade, she believes that Tim is the one who truly shines. Then she asked if that wasn't what the traveling merchant had said about Tim. Tim suggested they take a short walk. They approached a coachman and handed him Chris's letter of recommendation. The coachman smiled and said that Chris was a good man. Then they asked if they really intended to go back to that dilapidated house. He allowed Tim and Gilnaries into the car, but warned that the journey wouldn't be smooth. They only transport goods, so speed is prioritized over comfort. Gilnerize remarked that the journey looked like it would be very bumpy. She even joked that if she accidentally fell and had to hug Tim tightly, she would understand why. Tim reassured her that he might be a little unreliable, but told her to hold on tight. The driver introduced himself as Rock and asked if Gilnerize was the lost princess. She introduced herself as Gilnerize and asked him to call her Gil, saying that she was now under his service. Tim also introduced himself. Then I thought that Rock's thinking made sense, because Gilnerize looked like a princess. So it was natural to think that way. Gilnerize asked him if something was wrong. Tim replied that it was nothing, just that he thought if the outfit were a little simpler, it wouldn't stand out so much. She reassured him not to worry, because she really loved the outfit, and the striking purple color was perfect. Then she asked him if he was a fan of purple. Tim agrees, and Gilnerize showed him her hair. He immediately recognized it as the same color as the purple she had just mentioned. She said she would definitely remember this shade of purple forever. Rock announced that they were ready to leave. Tim seemed to remember something, and Gilnerize asked him what he was thinking about. Tim asked Rock if they could wait a little while. Rock, curious, asked what he was planning to do. Gilnerize quickly understood, and Tim explained that it all involved sewing. Tim then made some pillows for everyone and handed them out to each person. They said they would be very useful throughout the journey. Rock was surprised, commenting that they could also be used for crafting, and remarked that Tim's sewing skills were impressive. Tim humbly replied that he was nothing special. The others were delighted to receive such soft pillows, with one person even praising them as wonderful. Rock said that traveling by carriage could be very inconvenient, so having a pillow was a real lifesaver. Tim was glad everyone liked them. Then Gilnerize thought about reducing stress. He whispered something into Tim's ear. She said that with his skills, he could probably do even better. Tim blushed when he heard her say that. He agreed. A curious man wondered what Tim would come up with next. Rock asked Tim what kind of trick he was up to now. Tim made a pillow in the shape of a cat. Gilnerize beamed at the sight of it and exclaimed how adorable it was, calling it a chubby, protective cat pillow. She added that it's a well-known fact that cats have healing abilities, and this pillow would warm people's hearts and relieve stress. Gilnerize asked him if that was true, and he agreed. I thought to myself that she really loves cats. Gilnerize stretched out the arm of the cat pillow and said that it was not only adorable. When you pull it out and wrap it around your waist to sit, you will feel more comfortable. Hearing that, everyone burst into laughter. She asked why they were laughing. Rock asked why the cat had stretchy arms. He didn't quite understand, but he thought it was amazing. He also called it the Chubby Cat Protective Pillow and suggested shortening the name to CCSC. Gilnerize asked if it was a good idea. Rock asked if it was okay for Tim to give everyone one. Tim replied that they just needed to use them. That was the little he could do. Rock thanked him and said they would arrive in the kingdom of Linhart after an overnight journey. So he suggested everyone get in the car. Tim thanked him, and the group continued their journey for some time. Tim saw the East Gate in the distance and realized how far away it was. He thought about how he would become the greatest explorer. It had been 3 years since he left home, and he recalled the moment his sister Ari nearly burst into tears. He wondered if his brothers and father had forgotten him, calling him a failure, labeling him useless, and only assigned him menial tasks. However, those tasks had their own value. He bid farewell to the Cynthia Empire, his father's empire. He was no longer a prince or errand boy. Now, he will surely become the greatest explorer, proving his worth to his father's family and those who abandoned him. As they continued their journey, night fell. Gilnerize noticed his mood and decided to talk to him understandingly and apologize. He reassured her that everything was all right and told her she could lean on him if she wanted to. She agreed, but only if he insisted. Then she rested her head on his shoulder. He thought about showing a stronger side of himself. But Gilnerize remarked that he was so soft and fragrant, wondering if it was heaven. He replied that he had used fabric softener on the clothes, and because of the long journey, he told her to sleep comfortably. Rock looked back and said they were halfway there and should take a break. Tim replied that he was fine and suggested checking on the other merchants. However, Rock pointed out that thanks to those pillows, everyone felt comfortable and advised them to continue their journey to the kingdom of Linhart without stopping. At that very moment, they were attacked with arrows. Rock shouted that it was a bandit attack, and the carriage began to tip over. He advised everyone to jump out and roll to safety. Gilnerise quickly pulled Tim away and created a magical shield to protect both of them. She apologized for letting her guard down. Tim thought to himself that she had pulled him up in the blink of an eye and created a magical shield. Then he asked about the others. Rock was surprised to see all the pillows transform and now cover everyone. Gilnerise realized it was the protective feature of the pillows. She thought it would be dangerous if they fell out of the car, but the pillows had transformed into a suit of armor, protecting their bodies from any impact. As Tim had predicted, the pillows had kept all the merchants safe. Upon seeing the robbers, Gilnerise announced that she would deal with them. She was still holding Tim and thanking him. He asked if she could put him down. She replied that it would be dangerous for him to leave her side, so they would fight like this. Tim felt embarrassed being protected by a princess. Gilnerise pulled his face close to her body, telling him not to leave at this moment. Tim felt a strange, mixed sensation. One of the robbers fired a flare. He said he had targeted the small caravan with a magical attack, thinking they were defenseless. However, he didn't expect them to have a mage with them. The horses had run away, meaning they would no longer be able to escape. He ordered his accomplices to drop the goods and disappear. When the robbers surrounded Gilnerise and Tim, she declared that they were the ones who should disappear. She cast a lightning spell, stunning them all. One robber wondered how she could use lightning magic without chanting a spell. Another concluded that she must be a high-level sorceress. The gang leader ordered his accomplices to stop hesitating, saying that the sorcerer was no problem nearby, so they should attack immediately. However, Gilnerise confidently stated that previously, she might be slow, but now she's much faster. Thanks to the outfit Tim made for her, Gilnerise moved so fast that it astonished the robbers. She laughed and teased them, saying they were too slow and would never be able to hit her, while holding Tim tightly. Tim struggled to breathe and said that she was hurting him. He thought to himself that the situation was terrible, and although the attacks all missed, but something else got hit. He felt a strange sensation, and when Gilnerise saw Tim's nose bleeding, she frowned and told the robbers that she didn't know what they had done to him. But how could they dare hurt him? She then created a giant magic circle in the sky, unnerving the robbers. She warned that it was insane to challenge her and ordered them to retreat. She added that they should never come near her again. As the robbers fled, Gilnerise asked Tim if he was all right and offered to treat him. Tim reassured her that he was fine and then apologized for the situation. Rock then said that they really had to thank both of them, because it was thanks to their efforts that the goods and the merchants were safe. Tim humbly replied that it was all thanks to everyone who wore the cushions he made. Rock told Gilnerise that he had never seen such powerful magic. She replied that she only used magic to ensure Tim wasn't hurt and that he needed to be more careful in the next battle. Tim reassured her not to worry. But then he noticed his blood had stained her dress red. Tim quickly used his abilities to clean the blood stain from Gilnerise's dress. She thanked him, but he couldn't help but notice a hint of disappointment on her face. Rock remarked that the carriage was completely damaged, and it would take them 3 days of walking to reach the kingdom of Linhart. Gilnerise suggested they walk there. Rock agreed, saying it was the only option. One person in the group pointed out they couldn't carry all the goods, so they would have to leave some behind. Another added that their livelihood depended on those items. However, Rock remained optimistic, saying that what mattered was that they were all alive. Tim thought to himself that despite the difficult situation, Rock's optimism was impressive. He then told the group not to worry, as he could carry all the goods and parts of the horse-drawn cart. They laughed, one asking how he planned to do it, another questioning whether Tim was even considering himself strong enough to carry all that stuff. Tim simply used his organizational skills. It made all the furniture disappear, astonishing everyone. He reassured them not to worry, explaining that he had stored everything in another space and could retrieve it any time. Tim went on to say that they should have done it that way from the beginning and apologized for mistreating the horse. Gilnerise remarked that his skill was truly awe-inspiring and unusual. Rock agreed, saying Tim was amazing, and he even thought Tim might be very impressive in Gilnerise's eyes. Tim humbly replied that it was just a small skill. Gilnerise turned to Rock and confirmed that he was right, then proudly showed off the outfit Tim had made for her. Tim asked her to wait a moment. He thought to himself that both of them understood how to compliment others. He felt motivated to do his best, as if spurred on by the admiration from Gilnerise and Rock. Rock then mentioned that thanks to Tim, the luggage issue had been resolved. But now they face a food problem. They might have to travel to the kingdom of Linhall without food, possibly enduring 3 days without food or water. One man remarked that it would be very difficult for them. Another agreed, saying it was stressful, but there was no other option. Tim reassured everyone that everything would be all right and revealed that he happened to have enough food for 1,000 people. Rock curiously asked Tim what he intended to say about the food supply for 100 people. Tim suggested they make use of it and suggested they eat amela. Then he cleared the table and began to take out enough food for all 30 people. Gilnerise asked in surprise if she could eat a rice ball. Rock was curious too, wondering what kind of magic Tim was using. He joked that Tim might even conjure up a bathtub and a bed. Tim apologized and explained that he couldn't prepare the bath. Rock laughed and admitted he was just joking. But then Tim surprised everyone by saying he could provide beds for them. Rock was astonished. If Tim could really do that, it would be crazy. He asked if they could have a huge sandwich. Tim agreed and asked everyone to order one. When Tim thought about the sandwich, he knew exactly what he was going to do. A thick bun with 2 hamburger patties, cheese, lettuce, chopped onions, and plenty of ketchup. He also sliced potatoes into sticks and fried them, sprinkling some salt on top, perfect for dipping in ketchup. Regarding drinks, Tim uses a grayish-white mineral water. He has the ability to analyze the composition and properties of all kinds of rocks. So he made a drink from this type of ice, grinding it into powder, then mix it with lemon juice and water to create a carbonated soda. After combining all the ingredients, the drink is ready. Tim doesn't serve burgers, fries, and soda right away. Instead, he handed Rock a plate. Rock remarked that the dish looked quite unusual, surely something Tim had just created. Tim reassured him not to worry, asserting that he hadn't been careless in his preparation. Rock took a deep breath, the aroma filling the air, and remarked that it was wonderful. However, the dark, frothy drink looked a little scary. But Rock trusted Tim and was eager to try. Rock decided to start with the drink. Just as he was about to take a sip, Tim warned that it was a little unusual. Rock immediately spat out, his mouth burning, and asked Tim what he did. Tim calmly replied that he hadn't done anything special, he just needed time to get used to it. Rock, still cautious, asked if it was poison. Tim insisted it wasn't. And after taking another slow sip, Rock realized that it was actually very delicious. Encouraged by that, the others asked if they could have something similar. Tim agreed, telling them he would make it with teriyaki sauce. One person admitted they didn't know much about cuisine, and another wasn't sure what to order. Tim asked them to simply state their preferences. One person requested a spicy dish, another wanted a dish with meat, and a third requested ice cream with lots of vegetables. Tim served everyone according to their request and encouraged them to feel free to ask for more if they wanted. While eating, one person remarked that they had never tasted anything so delicious. The whole group expressed their gratitude, thanking Tim for the wonderful meal. Tim felt a little emotional. Tim bowed his head to thank them. Rock laughed and asked why Tim was thanking them. Tim told himself that he was genuinely surprised by their joy, especially since he rarely received praise at the guild. Then he turned to Gilnerise and asked if she had made up her mind. She pondered whether she should order a drink, but then imagined Tim stepping on it barefoot, imbuing it with his essence. She quickly dismissed the thought and decided not to ask. When Tim called her, she asked for some time to think. The next scene shifts back to the guild. Naya approached a man and asked where the guild stored its food because he couldn't find the storage facility. The boy replied that he didn't know, that he had only been given the task by Tim. Nia commented that the only name the boy seemed to mention was Tim. At this time, a group of adventurers returned. Naya told the boy to wait and see the results achieved by the guild's outstanding members. A wounded adventurer staggered forward and said the journey had been terrible. Nia asked what had happened. The man explained that during the mission, most of their teammates had been defeated, and they were in a state of complete collapse. He reported that almost all of the explorers were seriously injured and the situation was critical. They cried for help, some felt as though they were about to die. A young woman, her voice trembling, pointed to serious injuries and asked to be taken to a medical station. Other explorers also called for help, asking where they could find medicine. Naya muttered about bad luck, mentioning that he had just been appointed team leader. Then he asked what had happened. One boy replied that it was strange. One explorer was torn apart by a dragon, another was burned alive, and a third was merely trampled. Naya told the boy to wait and said that wounds like that could have killed anyone. The boy denied it, explaining that their defensive abilities had protected them, even while wearing Tim's tattered explorer suit. Naya looked at the boy's outfit and asked, "What is this?" The boy explained that it was the 2-day outfit Tim had made yesterday. He said that Tim's clothes usually fall apart after only 1 day. But at least the other adventurers should have decent equipment bought from the shop. Naya was surprised to hear about Tim. The boy went on to say that explorers always get injured on their missions, and they desperately need more healers. Naya wondered if they were the ones holding the organization back. Then he called Ganesh and asked why none of the executives were involved in high-level assignments. Ganesh apologized, saying he had earned too much money and now needed some. Naya, enraged, yelled at him, angry that Ganesh had been drinking instead of focusing on his duties. A woman called out to Naya, asking for help with the injured. Naya rudely refused her request, even calling them useless. Despite their pleas, she insisted that they would die without help. Ganesh intervened, telling Naya that he could heal them all at once, by using the divine item Nirvana that he had obtained. When the girl heard this, she knelt before Naya, begging him to use the divine artifact to heal the adventurers. However, Naya kicked her, causing her to fall to the ground. The explorers were then learning of Nirvana's healing power, and many of them expressed hope that Naya would use it. Someone mentioned seeing Naya taking an item from Gilnerise. This implies that Naya could help them at this moment. He recounted a story from many years ago when Gilnerise was attacked and used Nirvana to save everyone. Desperate, they both begged Naya to use it. Ganesh sensed the pressure mounting, and if Naya refuses, things will only get worse. Naya replied that it was impossible. If someone like Gilnerise had used it, then he could do it too. Finally, Naya took the item and tried to use it. He intends to activate a large-scale healing spell. However, when he tried, the magic spell cannot be activated. Naya then lied, claiming the item was fake. Hearing this, one of the adventurers scoffed, saying perhaps it would be better for them to die. The girl refused to give up, encouraging them to continue fighting for their lives, explaining that they were mobilizing all available treatment options. She even instructed the doctors to continue working until their mana ran out. The girl begged Naya for help again. Naya coldly replied that he wouldn't waste his magic on such trivial matters. She realized that the bandages and antiseptic had run out. I thought to myself, if Tim were here, everything would be resolved smoothly. Ganesh gave her the sacred artifact Nirvana, encouraging her to use it. He suggested that perhaps she could activate it, though Naya refused. She hesitated, lacking confidence that she could do it. Ganesh reassured her, saying she wouldn't know the result unless she tried. Just flip the coin and see, he encouraged. After some hesitation, she decided to give it a try. Naya stood watching, scoffing disdainfully. What good does it do to use a fake sacred artifact? But she didn't give up. She took Nirvana in her hands and burst into tears. They earnestly begged it to heal the wounded adventurers. Instantly, Nirvana shone brightly, leaving Naya stunned. She heard a voice telling her to get up, not to lie there anymore, because everyone would be worried. She turned to Ganesh and said that she had just heard a voice, but Ganesh couldn't hear anything. She realized that the voice was only speaking to her. She recognized the voice as coming from Nirvana. The voice instructed her to listen carefully, telling her that to activate the area of effect healing spell, she needed to concentrate and shout Ruby Nirvana. It also warned her not to stammer or mispronounce the words, because that wouldn't be cool. She agreed. Determined, they lifted Nirvana high and shouted, Ruby Nirvana! The moment she did that, a wave of healing light swept through her. Restore all adventurers. Seeing them recover filled her with happiness. The adventurers called her goddess, thanking her for saving their lives. Naya, still trembling, wondered to herself how a low-level mage like herself could have performed such a miracle. Ganesh remarked that the girl seemed to be above Nia in rank. Nia angrily retorted, "Don't talk nonsense." But the other adventurers gathered, pointing out that the girl had used a divine weapon, something even Nia couldn't control. They reminded them that while Nia had abandoned them, this girl had stepped up to help. Naya, trying to regain control of the situation, asked everyone to calm down and asked if the other groups had returned. Ganesh replied, remarking that Naya had been too arrogant to send everyone on high-level missions. If they don't come back, it will prove that the managers aren't as good as Nia thought. As he spoke, Ganesh toyed with a stone. Naya recognized it as a heart stone and asked if Ganesh was shirking his responsibilities. Ganesh replied nonchalantly that he was only writing a mission report. Then Ganesh turned to the girl and asked her name. She introduced herself as Fiona. Fiona explained that she had just killed an A-rank adamant turtle and obtained its heart stone. She said she intended to give the stone to the guild master. At that moment, Ganesh announced that Fiona would now be their new president. Fiona was surprised, and the other adventurers surprisingly agreed with the decision. Naya immediately intervened, asking everyone to calm down and asserting that Fiona was not qualified to be president. Fiona herself was stunned and didn't know how to react. However, Ganesh told her that if she became president, she might be able to help Tim someday. Hearing this, Fiona thought about Tim and realized that all this time, she has always been the one receiving help. It's time for her to stand up and lead. Ganesh noticed the determination in her eyes and remarked that she had the right mindset for leadership. Fiona nodded, agreeing to do her best. Naya angrily shouted, telling everyone to be quiet. He insisted that he was still the chairman. In a fit of rage, Nia unleashed a magical attack aimed directly at Fiona. However, Ganesh stepped in front of Fiona, blocking the attack with his bare hands. Blood dripped from his palms as Ganesh turned to look at Nia, asking if she really wanted him to decapitate him. Naya was stunned, scoffing in disbelief, saying that it was impossible for Ganesh to block wind magic with just his bare hands. But Ganesh, remaining calm, shifted into an attacking stance and coldly declared that Nia was the fool here. If Nia continues spouting nonsense, he'll gladly chop off his head. Nia, now truly terrified, they hastily fled the scene. Fiona saw blood on Ganesh's hand and asked him to show her the wound. She quickly healed him using her magic. When thanking Ganesh, Fiona stated that she had made a decision. The organization will be renamed and will focus on social contribution activities, such as doing odd jobs to save lives or providing security. One worried boy spoke up, saying it might be too much since they were adventurers. Fiona replied firmly that the decision was final. She asked everyone to recognize how many times they had been helped along their journey. She understood that everyone had their own thoughts. But for now, she asked everyone to return to their rooms and reflect on who had inspired them to become adventurers. Ganesh observed the situation and commented that the Adventurers Club was gradually turning into a rescue center. Fiona turned to him and asked if that would help Tim. Ganesh nodded in agreement. Fiona later shared that she had mustered up the courage to meet Tim. They even talked to each other, and Tim mentioned someone he wanted to beat. Ganesh, curious, asked her to tell him everything in detail. Fiona hesitated, replying that she couldn't reveal Tim's circumstances. Ganesh continued to press the matter, jokingly asking if she would hold Tim's hand when she visited him. Fiona was surprised, not expecting him to think that way. At that moment, Nirvana's voice rang out, asking her what she thought of Tim. The scene shifts to Tim and the others. Tim tells Gilnerise that it feels like he just defeated a slime. Gilnerise shook her head, denying it. She said that if he got covered in slime, it wouldn't just be a feeling. She would go crazy. Tim asked about the small loopers, confused as they seemed to be low-level monsters. Gilnerise retorted sharply, saying that if those tentacles wrapped around him, she would truly lose her mind. Tim understood her meaning and panicked, fearing that her warning would come true. As they continued on their way, Tim told himself he had to take down a few weak monsters before reaching the kingdom of Linhart. He hoped to protect the merchants and Gilnerise. Upon spotting a single-eyed flying monster, he told Gilnerise that he wanted to take it down. However, Gilnerise refused, saying it was too dangerous and she would handle it herself. This scene repeated itself many times. Gilnerise always steps in between Tim and the monsters. Tim apologized, saying he had left the entire fight to her. Gilnerise reassured him not to worry, but Tim couldn't help but notice that the monsters seemed to be constantly drawn to him. He admitted that for some reason, all the monsters were charging straight at him. Gilnerise chuckled softly and remarked that perhaps it was because he looked delicious. Tim asked if that was the case and admitted that he wanted to be stronger so he could defend himself. Gilnerise replied that there was no need to rush and suggested they start gathering herbs. Tim refused, saying that if he couldn't contribute to the battle, he would feel useless. Gilnerise raised an eyebrow and reminded him that she had always been there for him all this time. At that moment, Tim turned to the others and asked if they were feeling tired from walking continuously. Rock replied that he felt very well, thanks to the merchant's boots that Tim made for them. Tim smiled and told Rock to let him know if anything was too difficult. Gilnerise, worried, asked if Tim was okay and offered to carry him if he felt tired. Tim blushed and quickly told her not to joke around. Gilnerise suggested Tim carry her instead of the other way around. Tim thought for a moment. Then suddenly, blood started flowing from his nose. Joan immediately became worried, realizing this was happening again. Tim quickly apologized, saying that a lowly person like him had no right to carry anyone, but he could carry her instead. Rock, clearly confused, wondered what they were talking about as it made no sense to him at all. Finally, they arrived at the kingdom of Linhart. While Rock felt relaxed and relieved to have arrived, the rest weren't very happy. They still craved Tim's cooking and wanted to sleep in his cozy bed again. Rock encouraged everyone to get up. Then, in a serious tone, he handed Tim a reward as a thank you gift for saving their lives. He said that the amount might not be enough, but that was all they had. Tim politely declined, explaining that the merchants had even lost their horses, so they would be in trouble from now on. Rock expressed his admiration for Tim and Gilnerise, saying he had never met such incredible people. Tim, on the other hand, praised Rock, calling him amazing. Rock humbly replied that he hadn't done anything special. Tim smiled and said that Rock's smile was the best thing about him. Tim thought about their journey, the bandit attacks, the lost horses, and the lack of food. But despite it all, Rock had maintained a positive attitude. Rock's smile kept everyone's spirits high. Meanwhile, Tim, full of skepticism, struggled to maintain his cheerful demeanor. Just then, a girl called Tim over. First, they praised him, saying he was very reliable and cool. Then another girl added that it was thanks to Tim that their journey had been enjoyable and fulfilling, calling him really cute. They invited Tim to join them. But before he could answer, Gilnerise rushed over, grabbed his hand, and pulled him away. As they were leaving, Rock called back, asking that he at least be allowed to thank them properly. Then he gave each of them a ticket. He explained that in this country there was an expedition guild called Deflia, where they could use tickets to check the status of magical devices there. Tim hesitated, remarking that the tickets might be expensive. Rock reassured him, saying that they were a gift and the merchants didn't really need them. He advised Tim and Gilnerise not to hesitate to accept them. Tim then told them to feel free to use the pillows and shoes he had made for them. Rock held Tim's hand. He said with determination, "One day, I will become the greatest businessman to conquer all of Asia. If you need any help, just contact me." "Thank you all and good luck." Tim felt encouraged by their words. Gilnarise, full of enthusiasm, asked if they were ready to leave and make a name for themselves. She added that with Tim's true strength yet unknown to the world, they would rise as adventurers and amaze everyone. However, Tim still hesitated, as he couldn't use a sword or magic, and his skills were limited to menial tasks, but he vowed to rise above it, believing he could do it. And this was the time for the underdog to step up. Both of them joined the association, and Gilnarise commented that they had arrived and were impressed by the grandeur of the gathering. The receptionist, Alma, greeted them and asked why they had come to Esteem Guild today. Gilnarise responded that they wanted to request a status assessment. Alma took notes, and Karma explained that this meant assessing the value of their magical device. Alma took notes, and Karma suggested they proceed together. Tim sensed Alma was a new employee. She checked the papers and said they had the latest form, which could assess basic stats, adventure skills, and life skills. Gilnarise was curious about life skills. Alma explained that these are often referred to as auxiliary skills. Karma added that while life skills might seem unimportant, they're actually crucial for the ability to marry and deal with high-level yokai, which shocked Gilnarise. She decided to focus on the basics right now. She didn't want to disappoint Tim because she was still in training. However, Tim encouraged her, telling her to be more confident. He joked that the fried eggs were delicious because he had tried them before. Alma and Karma both smiled, complimenting them on being a wonderful couple. Tim then gave them 2 tickets. Alma asked what they were. Karma replied that the tickets were free, telling them they just needed to quickly lead the way. After reviewing the papers, Alma said they would need to go into separate rooms, so they should go into each room to assess the situation. Karma hugged Gilnarise, reassuring her that she would take care of her. Alma then helped Tim, and they both bowed to each other as a sign of respect. Tim introduced himself. He thought this was the first time he had participated in a performance review. Karma led Gilnarise into a room and an introduction to the equipment. Gilnarise worried about Tim, wondering if he had been attacked by someone outside. Karma sat down with the device, assuring her there was no need to worry, explaining that Alma was harmless and quite frail. She added that if Gilnarise was worried about anything, it would probably be whether she could use the magical device correctly. Karma instructed Gilnarise to stand in the center of the circle, a beam of light surrounded her, and the assessment concluded. The results showed that Gilnarise only received a G rating, the lowest. Karma then pointed out that her hand-to-hand combat rating was E, meaning Gilnarise could potentially be a warrior, and her magic rating is C, which is quite impressive. With these stats, she could easily become a silver-ranked hunter. Gilnarise thanked Karma, but said that her rating wasn't a C. Then she pointed out a sign to Karma in the C. Karma was surprised to realize that Gilnarise had bypassed the loop, a miraculous feat. She had only heard rumors about such abilities. Gilnarise explained that she had reached rank S when she started the second loop. Karma was completely astonished by this revelation. Meanwhile, Gilnarise wondered what Tim was up to and hoped he wasn't being tricked into undressing for some kind of test. In addition, Alma asked him to take off his shirt. Tim was surprised and reluctantly agreed. Alma quickly apologized, saying that it seemed unnecessary for him to undress. "But if you want to, that's fine too." Tim asked why. Alma apologized again, explaining that it was her first time doing this job and she wasn't used to it. Tim reassured Alma, saying it was okay and that she could treat him as a test subject, so she didn't need to worry. Tim stands in the circle, and Alma completed his test. He was pleased with the result. But when looking at the results, they were all marked G, the lowest rating. He thought to himself that even though it was the lowest rating, but his only redeeming quality was perhaps his secondary skills, with the highest rating being only D, feeling disappointed. He told himself that he was useless. Alma comforted him, saying that wasn't true at all, and that he was much better than her. Tim then asked about the symbol next to the ratings. but Alma knew nothing about it and suggested it might be a bug. Tim decided to ignore it and walked outside. "I'm sorry, Gilnerise, for keeping you waiting." Outside, he saw a pretty girl chatting with Gilnerise. When Gilnerise saw Tim, she quickly approached him and, noticing that Gilnerise had a companion, smiled. Tim asked about the girl, and Gilnerise replied that she didn't know her because she had just been called in. The girl introduced herself as Lyra and suggested that they should learn swordsmanship from her. Realizing they were both novice hunters, she offered to teach them for free. Tim wondered why the lesson was free. Lyra explained that she only taught for free if Gilnerise also participated. And with her cute and pretty appearance, students would flock to her classes. Tim asked her if she was implying that she would use Gilnerise to attract more students. Gilnerise replied that she had no problem with it, especially since they didn't have money. Tim realized that was true. They needed to become stronger. Feeling embarrassed by Lyra's comment, he took a sip of something to hide his embarrassment. Tim sensed something different about Lyra, so he offered to treat her to a meal, since she was teaching them for free. Lyra pointed out that they had just said they had no money. Gilnerise responded that food was the only thing they had in excess. Tim then gave her a meal. She thanked him, saying she would take some home to save for later. Tim suggested she eat it now. Because they had enough food and didn't need to save any, he even offered her more food, and Lyra was surprised to see how much they had. Kneeling before them, she asked if they could let her sister have enough to eat. Lyra explained that she would take both of them home, because her older sister Chloe was frail and needed extra nutrition. Tim asked why Lyra didn't take the assignment if she was so skilled at swordsmanship. Lyra replied that it was obvious they were new to the country. She then explained that everyone in the slum was a bubetsu. Because Tim and Gilnerise didn't understand the term, Lyra pointed to the lizard-shaped mark on the back of her neck. She explained that 2 years ago, everyone in the capital was summoned to the castle for a health check, and those marked with a magical seal were called bubetsu, a term used to describe people who were discriminated against in society, had lost their homes and jobs. After that, they were no longer allowed to live in the city center and could only take on menial tasks or low-paying jobs, if they were lucky enough to find work. Right now, they're just trying to get by. Gilnerise pointed out that this is a form of discrimination, and cutting off the lizard's tail might be an overreaction. There are many possible explanations for this, such as diverting the frustration of ordinary citizens, but it is still too cruel. Then she asked him the easiest way to strengthen the bond between teammates. Tim asked if she meant helping each other. Gilnerise replied that there was a simpler method, that is, to create outcasts. It's similar to what Tim experienced at the guild. Tim thought that guild had always been a close-knit group, but Lyra said that being ostracized made things difficult. Even the act of secretly approaching others. Tim clenched his fist and said that if that were true, he would help, just like Gilnerise had done for him. Lyra apologized to them for bringing them to such a place. Tim looked over at Chloe, who was lying on the bed, and Lyra informed her that she had returned. Lyra advised Chloe not to push herself too hard, but Chloe replied that she didn't know how many more times she would have to say it. Tim and Gilnerise exchanged glances. Gilnerise then asked Lyra to let Tim handle the situation. Tim approached Chloe, who gently told him not to come closer, as he might catch a cold. She also mentioned that she was very dirty. Tim reassured her, saying everything was fine and she shouldn't worry. He believed that by healing her, he can wash away everything that's bothering her. After that, her cough began to subside, and she told Lyra that she felt much better. Lyra was delighted to hear that. Gilnerise then asked Tim about the stain on Chloe's clothes. Tim agreed and asked Chloe if she could show him her magic seal. Chloe nodded and showed it to him. Tim remarked that it was a stubborn stain, but he believed he could handle it. With his skills, he quickly cleaned the stain. This surprised Lyra because the contemptuous look had disappeared. Gilnerise mentioned that even though the illness had been cured, they should now focus on improving Chloe's nutrition. Tim suggested preparing some food and asked Chloe if she could eat porridge. Chloe agreed, and immediately Tim made porridge for her. Lyra and Chloe were both surprised when they saw Tim do that. When Tim fed Chloe porridge, Gilnarize felt a little jealous. And I wish I could feed her too. After feeding Chloe, Tim asks Lyra to gather those who have been marked by the seal of contempt, because he intends to clean for all of them. After a while, Lyra had gathered about 800 people, and wondered if Tim could handle it. Gilnarize helped direct everyone to line up in a single file, reminding them not to push or shove. Tim slowly approached each person and removed the mark of contempt from them. Their joy increased even more when the sign disappeared, and they realized that they would no longer be discriminated against, that they would be considered human beings once again. Everyone thanked Tim for his help. One man even said that with the mark gone, he could take care of his family. Tim replied that he was happy to have been able to help everyone. At that moment, a girl arrived, supporting her father, and asked Tim for help. Tim quickly assessed the situation and realized it was a case of severe malnutrition. He asked them how long they had been like that. Thinking about energy drinks, Tim realized they would need preserved food to meet their daily nutritional needs. With a gesture of his hand, Tim summoned a large quantity of food and explained that it would all become edible with the addition of hot water. He started distributing food, and when one woman tasted it, she exclaimed that it had been a long time since she'd had such a warm meal, and it was truly delicious. A man added that Tim not only removed the markings but also fed them, and they were extremely grateful to him. Then Tim offered to make new clothes for all of them. Everyone was surprised, but not long after, Tim provided them with new clothes. They were touched by their happiness and the success that came from Tim's simple efforts. Seeing Tim's touched reaction, Gilnarize said, "Let's eat too." Tim nodded and asked if she wanted some porridge. She asked, surprised, how he knew. As she stared at the bowl of hot porridge, she admitted that she was very sensitive to hot food and wanted him to blow on it to cool it down. Tim reassured her, saying that with his skills, he could adjust the temperature to her liking. Gilnarize seemed disappointed to hear this. Tim then said that he believed everyone had finished eating and had received their new clothes. Gilnarize stepped onto a box so he could see everyone and speak. She told the crowd that those who had suffered abuse were no longer labeled as despised. However, they still had to fear being discovered, as there was still a possibility of being caught and marked with the magic seal again. She suggested that everyone should keep their identities secret and start working slowly, aiming to leave the country.